Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons and 64. Over the course of the entire game we were treated to 64 independent shots of NiGHTS' finely rendered backside. That is what the counter is for. You're welcome, I have a guest.
Why didn't you keep counting, Riala? You stopped after the first one, and that's very upsetting to me. I wanted to see the rest of the Riala.
You have to wait until episode Riala for that, it's free DLC.
I am not weak. I am not weak. Say goodbye, little visitor. Oh, God, ow. I'm gonna throw out my throat if I keep doing that. Hello, everyone. I'm HeatherOnStevia, Austin on sugar. Whatever. Point is, I'm the one who shows up at the end of Tess's video series to talk about things that probably aren't true, but we don't care. We're gonna say them anyway. And we're gonna say them in droves. Specifically in, like, single formation camels, like marching back into the distance, because camels' dreams, I know there's a correlation somewhere there.
Like the Campbell Mirage thing in LSD Dream Emulator? Those are camels.
See, I was just thinking there's a camel in Lost Park, but yes.
Oh, yeah, that's also true. See, the first place my brain went was, yes, the first level from Donic Dree D Delicky's Island Blast Fuck Dream Drove Zone. You made a list for this episode and I didn't, so I shall leave the heavy lifting to your ass.
Oh wait, that wasn't a camel, that was a dinosaur. Oops. The dinosaur that's easily visible at the end of lap 2 of Lost Park's first mission that I just rewatched earlier today and apparently thought was a camel. Yes, I have my entire list here. Where do we start on this list? First, let's, I don't know, since you streamed the first game and have now done a complete Let's Play the second game, should we just establish the underlying lore that seems to apply so that everyone's on the same page when it comes to what it is that we're discussing for the rest of this video, and in what context that is, of course?
It seems like a logical place to begin.
Sure. So what is Dreamland?
That's a very good question.
You're supposed to say it's a level that Kirby goes through, and something, and nightmares, and the Land of Dreams, as Owl introduces it as. Oh, that wasn't enough flapping. Edit in flapping there. The Land of Dreams is, it's presented as a depot where visitors end up when they sleep, and their consciousness combined with the power of the Idia, I guess, creates the Nightopia, which are the dream world things that show up inside of each of the doors. And those are said to reflect the visitor's heart, which would imply that every visitor gets unique worlds? Am I gathering this all right so far? Correct me when I say something wrong.
I mean, it sounds right so far, because I've spent the past amount of time wondering what mine would even be.
Oh!
Probably not very good video game levels.
Yeah, you know, mine wouldn't either. It would literally just be like a farm, and like nothing but cows, and they're all like super pampered, like regularly, and I'm like the lead cow. Never mind. Oops. So, yeah, I mean, that's the story we're presented, but, especially given the first game didn't have Owl, or the Dream Depot, I'm not sure where your interpretation goes with that, but I'm still sitting here believing that the entirety of the Land of Dreams is fabricated by the hearts of the visitors. It just so happens to be that the fountain area is sort of a coagulation of all visitors from that area. Perhaps it's an extension of Bellbridge, since the weird, like, stairs that mean literally nothing in the grand scheme of things are just kind of there. I don't know. Maybe that's my interpretation. Tell me how I'm wrong, please.
The only consideration that I have is the level select menu thing in the first game is basically the equivalent, and it's just, well, more accurately, the Dreamgate, the Fountain of Dreams in Journey of Dreams, is just a glorified playable menu when you get right down to it. So it's just a matter of presenting it slightly differently, but then, of course, if you get all the dream drops in Journey of Dreams, then you could play as Clarice and Elliot in the Dreamgate anyway, but it's still Will and Helen's levels, so that sort of kerfuffles the canon a little bit, but ultimately it represents a hub of choosing one's destination, so I'd imagine that in one form or another there is that commonality. But whether or not that's got something to do with Bellbridge versus Twin Seeds, I don't know, I just know that Twin Seeds is an anagram of witnessed.
I wonder if that's intentional. I mean, it's night, so it probably is intentional. I'm still of the persuasion that Elliot and Clarice are Will's father and Helen's mother, respectively. My own personal headcanon, but don't mind me.
Ah yes, Helen's... Wait, hang on. Did you say Will's father and Helen's mother, or the other way around?
I think I said Will's father and Helen's mother. We're not getting into that kind of gender discussion yet. That'll come later.
That will happen. Just Helen's mother grew out of the crazy teenage anime protagonist hair phase, as did Will's father. Okay, never mind. Carry on.
Will's father's face looks like it was designed specifically off of Elliot's face, which is what got me thinking along these lines years ago. I just like the fact that one of the Dream remixes specifically has Will's father and Helen's mother singing a duet. Is the implication? I don't know. I found that cool. Because they got, what, 5 singers? The girl from the original game, who's now an adult, and 2 kids and 2 adults besides, all to sing, like, 10 different versions of the song. Why are there so many different versions of the song?
It's a good song, damn it.
Well, that is true. I'm not denying that. There's only, like, one version I really can't stand, and I don't remember what it's called, and I'm staring at the soundtrack right now, so what's wrong with me?
It's the Harlem Shake remix.
Don't give me ideas that could work! Okay.
Have to see if Sivagana hasn't done it first.
Oh shit. I'll get back to you on that later today.
I'll just say Infinite Gangnam Style and leave it at that.
It's the best thing ever. Oh god. So, with that established now, and my own tiny, stupid headcanon aside, I guess if we're looking at, regardless of whether or not I look at the Dream Depot itself as being kind of a fabrication of the Dreamers, in a sense, or if we just look at NiGHTopia as a creation of the Visitor's Heart, regardless of how you look at it, the fact that the entire gameplay section of the game is created by the Visitors, I'd say reflects a lot about the Visitors themselves, because, you know, art reflects the artist, so a creation would reflect the creator? Is that fair to say?
I'd say it's more than fair to say, because the whole subtext of both games, I'd say, is every facet of NiGHTopia in all its forms is as much about reflecting the dreamer as possible, and that's down to the themes of the levels, the population of the levels, the themes, the gameplay ethos of the levels as well, which I don't remember necessarily how it boils down in the first game, just because it's been a while since I played it, but certainly, as you will have encountered with your obsessive AAA/A rank runs that you were doing specifically because of this Let's Play,
That's been really fun.
Helen's are much harder to do perfectly, which I find to be, she's a musician, it has to be perfect, whereas with Will, he's a sportsman, so everything he does, it doesn't matter how you do it as long as it achieves the end results. Will's ethos is all about do whatever you can to make it work, whereas with Helen, it's if you stray from the sheet music, everyone will know and we will have tomatoes thrown at us, so do it right.
You say that now, but by the time this video goes up, my memory forest run, straying from the sheet music, you say. Boy, was that fun to record 20,000 times. No, that's definitely the hardest level in the game, and I'm starting to think the musical parallels really make sense there, because that's her musical level. Going back through her memory, it could imply a lot of things, especially since that's the only time in the game where we hear any mention of her dad.
Oh yeah.
Her dad's dead! That's what I'm getting to, but like I didn't want to really call attention to it in that sense. But
it was reincarnated as a violin.
Get it? So they're all together in the final scene. Oh, that's morbid.
That makes too much sense though, but it doesn't timeline-wise. But just imagine if Helen's father died, was cremated, and had his ashes mixed in with
Good.
planting a tree, and then they harvested the tree and made a violin out of it, but she's still young. That's not enough time for a tree to grow.
See, I was
But
thinking
the idea
just far
is that-
easier, just like clearly her violin's made out of that like carbon, compressed carbon, hard carbon, whatever that is. That's like super durable, and so like they cremated her father, and then his ashes were used in the carbonification process of the violin. I know what I said.
Alternative headcanon. Journey of Dreams is Lindsay Sterling's origin story.
Oh my god. Tess.
No.
How far are we going with this? Whew.
All the way down the rabbit hole.
Look, we're already there. Or owl hole, in this case.
Visitor.
Did you know? If you collect all the dream drops, they'll appear in this fountain. Oh boy. That drove me crazy, for the record. Every single time I accidentally stepped in there, and he's gotta stop you to remind you, hey, dream drops. And he never once says what they do, so I've never bothered trying to get them all. So, now I have a new life path, so to speak.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, I know I was going somewhere with that. Right, the other thing I want to add on to that, as far as that perfectionism goes... Nope, I'll come back to that because I don't remember what I was going to say. That's okay.
Well done.
As far as the creation of the actual dreams go, I'm not sure if you get any kind of implication out of this, but just the simple fact that Will's got, you know, windmills, roller coasters, and just bustling city superhero neon gambling casino.
Like, clearly he's a
Billiard?
fan of Michael Rosen.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going for. Who's Michael Rosen? And Helen, meanwhile, all of hers tend to be very reflective, fantastical, you know? Here's a place that's underwater, but it's not, and all the water that you can actually go and swim in is actually on the ceiling, for example. Or here's a mere nightmare fun house that's connected to crystal mountain trees that grow, mirrors, giant nights. And then the memory forest is probably the most grounded out of all of them, and it's a giant 7-story go fuck yourself in the middle of a forest. So I don't know how to read into that entirely, but it seems like she's far more concerned with the fantasy of dreams, Will's mashing together all the things he wants to see in reality. Something to that effect. Boyish versus girlish, I'm not sure what commentary they were trying to provide, but it's far more played straight than the first game, which was intentionally a feminine guy and a masculine tomboyish girl who would go through the levels and stuff. I'm not sure if that was even actualized too well in the first game. Anyway.
It's kind of arguable, bearing in mind Clarice had Mystic Forest, for instance, which is kind of like Memory Forest, but less memory, more cars.
See, I barely remember anything from the first game. I'm not there yet. I'm still gonna go back to those at some point very soon. But I don't even remember the cars. But that's okay, because I remember that level really not. No. No.
One thing that does lead me on to thinking, though, is, and it's established by Owl, woohoo, that in this particular case, Will and Helen have both been deprived of all but one of their idia upon arriving in the Dreamgate, and then that would suggest that their respective Nighttopias are sort of imbalanced when they're created. So Aqua Garden and Pure Valley are both born of just the idia of courage, with the idia of purity kind of being in that general vicinity, maybe influencing that. And it's not until you get to the later levels that they're comparatively more grounded on all sides, and then you get Bellbridge, which, because of the presence of the idia of hope within it in some aspect, is the most overall, just the most overall. Whereas, in the first game, it's a bit more chaotic, because Clarice and Elliot both go into the levels with all of the idia, and then lose them upon arrival, and then get them all back, only to lose them in the next level again, which suggests that all of their levels are more balanced in terms of representation. But then, just to throw a little question mark into that, basically the first 2 levels of Into Dreams are the same as the first 2 levels of Journey of Dreams, but just with the gender of the character visiting it reversed, because, well, at least I think it was anyway, because I think Elliot had Splash Garden, and now Helen has Aqua Garden, and obviously Will's got Pure Valley, and Clara's had Spring Valley, I think it was?
Yep.
So, if those represent super balanced, made by all the Idia levels, then what does that say about the idea of courage and purity? Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Well, no, because now that you mention that, Delight City and Memory Forest definitely seem like the culmination of the character we've come to know. They're the most fleshed out as an actual world, so to speak, as opposed to being, like, components of a person.
If we're going to speak of Will's levels being more grounded and Helen's being more fantastical, then the presence of the idea of growth in Memory Forest and Delight City kind of suggests that, because Delight City, for instance, it's based on what Will wants, his idealized view of the world of grown-ups, but then there's also these fantastical elements that are a bit more grounded in fantasy, as it were. You know, the ridiculously tall slot machine thing, the giant pool billiards snooker table, the Neon City as a whole, and Broadway! But then there's also Memory Forest, where, yes, it's got that fantastical element, but it's also the most grounded because it is a forest. It's based on her memories of actual real-world forests, and there's also the reminder that she needs to rehearse for her concerts, and this idea of, here, memories, reflect on your past so you can build on them, whereas with Will, it's, this is what you want your future to look like, keep an open mind. So growth kind of gives them a little bit of each other's mentality, and I find it very telling that their final non-boss missions each are basically Helen practicing for her concert and Will having one of Helen's favourite type of levels.
That's really interesting. I never quite thought about it like that, but I think the first time I thought along those lines of, like, you know, oh, idea of growth, you know, growing up and all that. Did you ever notice, this didn't occur to me until I was editing Memory Forest, but part of the second lap of the Merry Go Fuck Yourself level is a library. Just like books spilling out into the forest from a giant bookcase, and it's really interesting to see that.
It's kind of morbid if you think about it, because it's like, hey trees, they used to be trees, you're next.
Clearly that's her interpretation of it. That's also why there's a merry-go-round built into the tree.
We're gonna build shit here out of your corpse.
Go to a library, get a whole bouquet of books, go back to the forest, throw them, and if one of them gets caught in the branches of a tree, you're gonna die next, you're gonna die next. Like some sort of weird funeral wedding kind of, but it's books and trees. Carry on.
Tess, that made too much sense. Stop. The other thing, just to sort of springboard off of that, because if the last mission really is like the character's heart come full circle, having learned from the other person that they've worked with, then the second level, brought about through the combination of courage and purity with the recognition of building out of intelligence, those are sort of the actualization of their greatest weakness. Will is very lonely, Helen is very fragile. What does that say about them? And that actually really fits in with their character arc, if you want to represent that through the dream worlds. So, is intelligence more like reflection on themselves? Is that what I'm to gather from all this?
I think there's also a part of, within that, they recognize it as a weakness, but then in order to shield themselves from the consequences of acknowledging that weakness, they go about fixing it in the wrong way. Like,
Ooh.
In the case of Crystal Castle especially, Helen's missions are like the volcano thing, Dual Panic I think it's called. That's what I consider to be her representation of Will's favourite type of level in her side of the story. Like, that's protecting actual fragile objects from being broken, but that doesn't really help herself, that's just helping the vanity of the area, which it's explained as representing the Idia, but to an extent it is protecting the fragility of something else to prove to herself that she has the capacity to do that without actually acting upon it for herself. And more importantly, the point I was building to is the mission Labyrinth Guide, where she's taking Will through the castle, which is a massive maze. There's this idea of right, if I can work out how to logically problem solve, that will solve all my problems because it's an intellectual thing to do. And again, it's proving that she has the capacity, but applying it in completely the wrong way. And as far as Will goes, there's this recognition that he's lonely, and he's tried to create something out of nothing in the form of Lost Park, and it's sort of almost schizoid kind of presentation where is it prosperous? Is it a desert? What is it meant to be? Because of, did you try the TV? And then it's not even my meme, but I'm using it.
It just works. Keep going. Keep talking.
The whole thing with the Nightmarons doing their utmost to interfere with that, and this idea of, well, if I help the residents of the park I've created, then they will stay with me and I will not be lonely because they'll be alive, and the beanstalk won't come down, and the Nighttobians won't crash into the gumball machine, which, as I recall, was just on the track anyway, but whatever. Again, it's fixing their problems using intelligence, but applying it to the wrong thing. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. The other thing, kind of springboard off of that, because there was like a moment there.
It's what I do.
She's catching gems. Helen's catching gems to stop them from breaking because, the gems are very fragile. We need to protect the fragile things so that the fragile things don't break, as an extension of herself. If her heart is very fragile, then that must also mean that she considers herself needing to be protected so that she doesn't break. If facing your past, facing your memories is considered, sort of a way to grow up, in a way she's losing her fragility, which is a strength. So catching gems so that they don't break is the wrong way to do it, because the gems should just be strong enough to be able to handle a bounce. And that reflects back on her. If that made any sense whatsoever.
Oh, it absolutely does.
Good.
And it's been brought to my attention that it's not really a regular thing in most people, so this is just me being off-color in the head, I guess? But certainly for my own part, there are memories that I have that if I access those, it causes physical pain on my part. So I kind of get where she's coming from, this idea of, well, I need to protect myself from this fragility, because if I do look back, things will break, it will hurt. Yeah, I feel that. But she has in her case, she has the strength to confront her past and sort of grow up from it. Not always that simple, because in my case it's not something happened, I need to look at it and learn from it. It's more of a, bad things happened, yeah, I've learned my lesson from them, can they just go away now because social anxiety, yeah. I made this a bit too dark. Carry on, move ahead.
As far as all that goes, I think the opening stages certainly just reflect the characters more. Helen likes the fantastical more. Will tends to like appreciate the adult things, I guess. And in his mind, adults are the kind of people who can just look out and be like, yep, look at that windmill. It's a good windmill. It's doing its job. Green grass, healthy grass, random
hot air
cave,
balloon.
Hot air balloons. Oh, that's right. Lots of random chords everywhere in the stage. Zip lining, yeah. And those are just adult things. And I guess it goes to show that Will is still really young, but he's looking forward to growing up. And that's an interesting reflection to see along all three of his. Whereas Helen's like, oh, but it's fun to see. Sorry, let me go full Helen here. Oh, Will, thank you. And that's her being sad. Anyway, she looks at fantastical things, and I don't know. Since it's not much of their heart, it probably doesn't reflect them too directly, whereas the other two levels certainly do reflect their growth as characters. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a point in development where the two first levels were switched and they decided last minute not to perfectly reflect the first game. Call it a hunch. Next!
This idea that although they do go through this character growth, they're never locked out of going back to previous levels. I think, even when you're in the middle of one of those, one of those story missions where you go into a level and you get kicked out and you have to go back into that same door to carry on the mission.
Why did I never try that? Shit!
I think it does still let you go to other levels. It's just, you need to eventually go back in and carry on. So this idea that you're never locked out of going to previous levels, and even if you are in those cases, that's just call it story and move on because it's Sega. You know how they handle stories. But once you've cleared a level and got his idiot, you can still go back and replay previous missions, and it's fine. And I'd like to think that that's acknowledgement that even with this character growth, there is nothing wrong with going back and looking at these previous levels, partly as a milestone, a sort of a waypoint, a marker of how much character growth has taken place, but also a way of acknowledging these previous levels aren't wrong, and you weren't wrong for forming them. This is just a part of who you are, and that's fine to accept.
I really like that interpretation. So this kind of actually leads to my next question pretty well. What does Bellbridge represent?
The place where they live.
Tess... Okay, good, go. Let's work with it somewhere.
Well, to an extent, it's the culmination of all their growth over the course of the game, to such an extent that, you know, Knights is in trouble, they are able to fly of their own volition and, you know, go through the place. And I think there's some extent, because they have this sort of tunnel vision focus on, right, Knights has gone somewhere, we need to rescue Knights, they don't really have the brain space left to come up with an entirely new fantastic level, because there isn't a place that they would want to create that would functionally be Knights' prison. So the Nightopia that sort of forms as a consequence would just rely on their base instinct knowledge, that this idea of, right, we're going out. If we're going out somewhere, then it's probably going to be in the city where we live, so let's go out, and oh, it's Bellbridge, okay, that's fine, and then it sort of follows logically from there. And it's especially worth noting that the way the level builds up, because lap 1 of Bellbridge is just these floating buildings in the sky. After that one lap to sort of establish the scene, then they sort of dive down into the main body of the city, where you can actually see the, well, you can't see the ground, but everything is more grounded. It's no longer floating buildings in the sky, so it's more definitely concrete, like, yep, this is definitely Bellbridge, I know where I am, I know what I'm doing, as far as they're concerned. So, does that makes sense? Like, they wouldn't consciously want to form this fantastic Nightopia that would have to have a cage in it for Riella and Wiseman to put Knights into.
You just threw the most, like, idea in my head, and it's going to take a couple seconds for me to properly formate this, but hear me out here. So you said that they needed to create in their subconscious a place where Knights would be held prisoner.
Not out of them wanting to, but they've witnessed Knights being taken away, and certainly perceptively, if they jump into the sea of clouds underneath the Dreamgate, in their minds that should still lead somewhere, because the mind cannot comprehend infinite nothingness, and so that forms a Nightopia that they aren't thinking about forming, so it just bases itself on what they know rather than what they think.
But what if the prison is the real world, and they felt imprisoned by the real world? I often criticize the game for a few contextual things, like the fact that literally there's a gate, like with a lock on it, that's just floating in the sky that you can just go around, and that's your representation for going from lap 1 to lap 2, and from lap 2 to the cutscene. So could it?
I think that works, because
I love it.
The idea of, yeah, until you figure out how to move past it, you're stuck in an infinite loop.
But that also means that the real world that they experience is a prison, which contrasts with the escape of dreams and flying, which is also why they're flying over their city. There's something, the pieces are there, you do the work, because I'm done.
There's also the idea that Knights, whether as a Night Baron or just as a Knight entity, is somewhat confined by the presence of the real world as a counterpoint, as an opposite side of the coin to the Night Dimension, because being a Night Baron, Knights cannot exist in the real world, so having a representation of the real world would be the ultimate prison for a creature entirely derived of dreams.
Huh. Yeah. No, I see it.
And it also represents, like, Riella and Wiseman. Certainly Riella's objective, if not to punish Knights, is to, at the very least, strip them of their power by separating them from the visitors, because as far as Riella's concerned, Knights is just, to quote the game, a puppet borrowing power from the visitors. So to separate Knights from the visitors, Knights is suddenly powerless, which then allows Wiseman to do whatever. So, to an extent, Riella's goal would be to remind the visitors of the real world and thus say, hey, look, that's the real reality, you're going to wake up soon because you just remembered that this is a dream, you're going to, you know, this sort of to prompt them to wake them up and get them out of there.
Would lights shutting off in the city thus imply daytime?
Yeah,
Ooh.
like it has this beautiful thematic balance of everything's being consumed by darkness, but also This is what happens when the sun comes up, visitors. You're going to wake up soon and you're going to be powerless.
I can't do a good Wiseman, otherwise I'd be sitting here with some kind of speech. I don't know, I immediately go back to Black Doom whenever I try.
For some reason, I'm just imagining just Wiseman with just like a martini glass in one hand, just or mimosa, preparing for brunch because it's morning.
I just like the idea that like his hand is inspecting the glass while it holds it, occasionally blinking like a nice clinks by. Anyway, sorry.
I'm also imagining just Camelan in like a dressing gown and like a nightcap and like with just like a mug of coffee. Just like it's too morning for the magic shit. Come back later, kids. Just a little bit of stubble, which is impossible for a chameleon, but still.
Oh, well, look, if we have bearded dragons, we can have bearded chameleons, right? That's how the universe works, right?
Obviously.
Oh boy. You said something in there, so if you don't mind us jumping subject again, I'm gonna try to remember what exactly it was that you said that was really cool. Shoot.
Mimosas for brunch.
Oh, right. Do you want to just really quickly skim over the endings and the alternate endings and what that means and, like, what the hell it means for the land of dreams and actualization of dreams to fucking die? Whatever Wiseman was going on about in the last story. Like, I don't know if there's even anything to be said there. We can just edit this part out, I promise, but, like, I don't know. Do you think there's anything in there?
It depends if you're building up to something or not.
Oh, I'm not. This was just something I wanted to cover while we were bringing up the ending of the story and the implication of Wiseman as a character.
Well, either way, the endings are very contradictory to what we've heard in the game, which allows us to sort of question how much of the game tells us the truth anyway, because certainly in the true ending, Will and Helen wake up crying and they remember what happened in the world of dreams, but Owl says that they don't, and every time you start up the game, the counter on the loading screen goes up by one, so, the first night, the second night, the third night. So clearly there's some level of consistency and persistence there, and it's possible for you to play, 10 separate loadings of Will's game and only play through Helen's once, and yet somehow they will still be in Crystal Castle and Delight City at the same time. Which says quite a bit for time dilation within the dream world, but this idea that they lose their memories when they wake up, but they clearly don't. So I'm not sure whether that's them trying to instill some jeopardy, or whether it's just your real-world memories and your night dimension memories are kept separate from one another, and you regain one when you enter the dream world, and then you lose it again on waking up, but then you get it back the next night, or... I don't know where I'm going with this.
First night, second night, third night. Are those implying 3 different times that the moon has come up? Or 3 different times that the character has gone to bed? Could Will have woken up from a nightmare, a start of some kind, because he got night over, or whatever the ending is when you run out of time? Could he have woken up from that, gone downstairs, got a glass of warm milk, came back upstairs, fell asleep again, and then that was the second night, maybe? I don't know. I'm spitballing here. Tell me I'm wrong, please.
That also presents the contradiction of, we see that opening cutscene, and then when we see their ending, that's kind of the next day follow-up to that scene, but there could be as much as 57 years in between. And for that matter, you could just keep reloading the game and it would be like the 752 billionth night, and yet they're still kids. Hey, it's kids. What's a dinosaur to dine? What's a call to dine to do?
Not just that, but Helen's canonically going to have to perform in a week, right? Like, it's specifically a week away, or was the calendar nondescript enough that we couldn't tell what day it was actually at the time?
I don't actually remember.
And then there's the other question. Since that was technically part of Helen's dream, could she be dreaming about the time when it is a week away, and it's actually 27 years away? Could it be?
Actually, you do raise a good point. The opening cutscenes are their dreams, so we don't actually know the relevant time distance, so okay,
Wait, their opening cutscenes are their dreams? I thought his father actually did teleport into a plane. I'm sorry, what? That was all solid memory right there.
I do like that effect, though. That is a very dream thing to do.
It's my favorite.
You looked at it and you looked at it again and it's different.
That's my absolute favorite part of the blocking of the scenes in the entire game. That's the best part of the animation, as far as I'm concerned.
I would say that Helen's thing of seeing her mother's reflection and then it going sour, that's also a nice touch.
Okay, so one genius thing involving the parents in both. And that's, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm wondering if airplane, excitement vehicle thing, air, flying, and then also reflection, mirror, crystal. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I've got this weird feeling about that was meant to be some kind of correlation as well to the stages.
That, I guess, kind of makes sense because I can make this work. Because in the case of Will, it's, hey, look at this person that you look up to that decidedly isn't you. He's flying. You're not. And then there's like, with Helen, it's, hey, look, on the other side of this glass there's something you want. Now look at yourself. Look at this person you're hurting by not looking at yourself. So it's sort of like the nightmares are kind of saying, Will, be free, you know, open your mind. Helen, you're a terrible person.
I see why you relate to Helen now.
Ew. Self-loathing, yeah.
Woo! Okay. Okay, I think that covers everything I wrote about the ending, unless there's something... oh, right, shared consciousness. What does it mean to have a dream, potentially a lucid dream of sorts, flying above your own hometown with somebody who you can meet and know in the real world? And then I'll get off the story, because that's literally all I have to say about that. Then the fun stuff starts.
Yeah. I know. I feel like a lot of Bellbridge can just be hand-waved for this idea of they made it without thinking, so... like, I suppose the subtext of the brain being capable of things that we don't fully understand, like precognizance and clairvoyance, and like because they're not actively trying to influence one way or the other, they end up doing incredible things like foreseeing that, hey, there's another person, and they're actually real. And like every time they meet up with each other in the dream world, both in Bellbridge and outside of that, it's through influences outside of their own control because they're sort of focusing on other things.
You don't suppose paralooping enemies sending them to my dream has anything to do with Reala sending the characters to the opposing character's dream, do you?
Well, it did take me until Will's story to realise that Reala's pulsating, teleporting pepperoni of death circle is just his paraloop.
Well, yeah, but he does it so seductively in Helen's story.
Well, it just shows a significant character difference between NiGHTS and Reala. You know, with Reala, it's all methodical, calculated, in control. With NiGHTS, it's just, whee, we're gonna do shit! So the paraloop is a bit more fleeting.
This is why I like NiGHTS so much. Alright, that's everything I got. Anything more to add to the story before we get into the really deep, stupid stuff that I love?
Well, it depends on what you classify the whole gender situation under.
Oh, that's next.
Oh, good.
Okay.
And that ties in with what we were saying about NiGHTS and Reala as well, because that dichotomy applies to them as well, but that's step 2. Proceed with step A.
Alright, so first off, I'm curious what you personally think about the whole... I know you said it in your actual playthrough, but I'm gonna prompt you to put it into words again. NiGHTS as a nightmare being a betrayal. Why would that matter to the kids? And I guess this is about as good a segue as we can get to, you know, from story to gender. But first, NiGHTS being a nightmare, why does it matter? And then second of all, NiGHTS being a nightmare and having not told the kids, why does that matter? Do they correlate? If one doesn't matter, do they both not matter? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that before I throw my own towel into the ring.
I would say it boils down to a topic that you're intimately familiar with. Labelism. Mm-hmm. Because up until the point where NiGHTS is outed as a nightmare and the kids have just only ever seen Nightmare and presented as, look, they're these evil entities from Nightmare, they only exist to serve Nightmare, so therefore any Nightmare must be a nightmare creature, it's right there in the name. And then finding out that, like, I think it's potentially just a product of weak writing in this case, because, once again, Sega, but NiGHTS has already demonstrated themselves at that point in the story to be a force for good, regardless of their species or race or whatever you'd call that. So it's a betrayal only in terms of societal norms, where the kids are told anyone who conforms to this label is evil, and it's almost a heavy-handed way of delivering the moral that that isn't the case. But if you've got a fancy way of wording that, then by all means.
Oh, no, that's basically where I'm going with this. First of all, if you can't tell that Knights and Reala are vaguely siblings, then, like, what the hell is wrong with you, you dumb kids? But more importantly, I don't know, there's something about the idea that Night Marin had been described to the kids by Owl as an alignment, not as a source of existence, a physical trait. Like, there's literally nothing about the goober, or whatever the birds are called, I honestly don't remember, but the birds you chase down, there's literally nothing that physically relates them to Reala, and yet they're both Night Marins. So, Night Marin, all you have to be a Night Marin, according to the story, is you have to have been created by Wiseman, which I'm not sure if that makes Owl a Night Marin as well, but I'm gonna say it does, because Wiseman created the Land of Dreams in its entirety. So, there's that. So, then there's this idea that, well, if Night Marin is portrayed as an alignment to the kids, and as kids, without any critical thinking applied, have only seen Night Marin as a villainous position because it's an alignment thing, finding out that Knights is a Night Marin without having clarification on what Night Marin means, that's a betrayal through misinformation or neglect to inform. Far
or
less
21st century politics.
Well, I'm not even gonna go there. Unless you want to. I mean, feel free.
God, no.
But for my money, it's... See, okay. Equivalency time. Gender, as society views it. Somebody's portrayed as a girl in every respect, and then you find out that they used to be a guy. They used to be created by Wiseman, but now they've chosen their own path with their own free will, or whatever. Why do I suddenly think men are all created by Wiseman? This is not what I'm implying, I promise.
No.
But, like, usually you find out before you've gone ahead and touched Knights, and it's better if you just experience it. There's a lot of weird sexual implications with dualization, but usually at this point it's when you throw down your hands and you're like, Jesus Christ, Knights! Usually you tell me this shit before we do that! And that's the impression that I get out of their sense of betrayal, is like, it would have been nice to be told beforehand, since we are close friends, since we are so intimately, like, whatever, you kinda have to let me know about this stuff beforehand.
Like, it's more a betrayal of friendship in that you can trust me with this information, why did you think you couldn't? As opposed to...
Exactly. And I saw you with the fucking mask on. Why did you even wear that? No, like, seriously, why did Knights wear that in the story? That literally made no sense in both cases. However, with that said, the idea of having the mask and being represented as loyalty to Wiseman, but it's also just the mark of a Night Marin, what does that even mean? Like, really, it means nothing. It's just the fact that Knights never explained it properly. It comes across as a betrayal of trust, not a betrayal of existence to me. So to that extent, I can understand it. Helen's response is Night Marinophobic. Will's response sounds far more like what mine would be. Why the fuck didn't you tell me that? That's kind of important to know. Well, why? There's no practical application. Yeah, I don't care that there's no practical application. That's a big thing about your life that I had no idea about. You know, and there's something interesting there that segues pretty nicely into Knights and gender. You want to start us off with your interpretation of that?
Oh, this has been a big thing we've been building up to over the entire series.
Dude, this has been like a part of my life. Every time I go back to Knights, this is why Knights is such a cool character to me. So go ahead.
The person who created Knights to begin with, like, real world, so not Wiseman, but the actual series creator, already said that Knights is supposed to be a reflection of the dreamer, which naturally means that Knights' identity is entirely fluid based on who's dreaming. And
the interview itself, if I'm remembering right, he says Knights has no defined gender, which roughly translated into English as Knights is genderless, which is inaccurate, but Knights has no clearly defined gender, is his intent. Less that Knights needed to be gender fluid, but it was left to the interpretation of every player or every visitor, depending on how you look at it. Now go ahead.
And so, you will have noticed that over the course of the series, I took great pains to refer to knights in gender-neutral terms, which I'm sure Tristan is going to hate me for because he doesn't like the use of they as a singular pronoun, but I mean, I do, so that's what I've been doing. But I think the one thing that weakens not the idea of this, but the application of this as far as portraying it goes, is that, as I mentioned in the series, Will referring to knights as a he as well. So this idea of any fluidity sort of goes out the window because it's just, oh, well, Helen calls knights a he and Will calls knights a he, so I guess knights is a he. But that's not really the intent. So knights and Riala as well, by that same token, are sort of two sides of the same coin in the mirror. There's like, you look in the mirror and instead of a reflection there's a coin and they're on the two sides. There's too many dimensions involved here to properly process. But the idea is not to form one complete person, but to cover every pie slice on the wheel of personality, I suppose. The idea that Knights is supposed to be the perfect complement to your own personality by not filling in the gaps, because that implies that people are incomplete, but to be everything you're not, but in such a way that you still harmonize. Sort of like two pieces of well, kinstones from the Minish Cap of all things. Like pieces of a puzzle fitting together, like one covering the bases of the other. And so that's where the idea of gender fits in. Not, oh, well, Will is a boy, so Knights must be a girl. Oh, Helen's a girl, so Knights must be a boy. But rather the portrayal of masculine or feminine characteristics and whether or not the character finds any particular binary alignment towards them. So part of the reason why, like, I, for instance, refer to Knights as a, in non-binary terms is, I mean, I don't identify as non-binary myself. I personally, I consider myself to be cisgendered male. But that's not out of, oh, I'm so manly, masculine. Like, it's more of a...
He's definitely not.
Gender doesn't really mean anything to me as a concept. Like, I know for some people it is a huge deal, but for me, it isn't. And because it's a non-question to me, I'd imagine it would be a non-question to how Knights would appear to me as well. So, gender wouldn't really come into it. But in the case of the other characters, it does. You gonna say something?
Oh, no, I was just pointing out you're definitely not the manly sort. Go on.
No. And then there's Riala, who is... Like, in the series, I said I'm more comfortable with referring to Riala as a he, because Riala is certainly much more masculine presented, but I'd imagine that's, to an extent, down to the characters as well, because in the same way that Knights is an achiral reflection of the visitor, Riala is a chiral reflection of Knights. So it's sort of it's like if you put something into Google Translate a couple of too many times. So Knights is a counterpart to the visitor, but Riala is a retrograde inversion of Knights. So this is functionally everything the visitor is, but not. So if Knights is portrayed as especially feminine, Riala would be portrayed as especially masculine. You know, if Knights is portrayed as being especially gentle and tender, then Riala would be rough and tough and generally unpleasant. So, is that making any sense whatsoever?
It made a lot more sense in the first game when Elliot was intended to be a more feminine boy while working with Knights, meaning that Knights would be a girl to him, female in this case to him, thus making Riala more definitively male. So when he goes, stands up there, points his whole arm and goes, "That is non-Knights," we can assume that he's a guy there. And in the same way, we're assuming that Knights is not a guy there. I don't know. I find this kind of stuff, the idea that they had to portray Knights as generally androgynous in the game, and I don't think they did a good job. And then, is it androgyny, or is it, what's the gender master list thing on Tumblr call it? Mirror gender? I think that's inaccurate, but reflective of who you're with is how I would view Knights' portrayal of gender. Essentially, with Will, Knights is more feminine. With Helen, Knights is more masculine. And I find that very interesting. And you pointed that out to me in a way that I had to go back through the story and find that again. Unrelated, but kind of interesting to that, Will and the Owl and Knights never once acknowledge Knight's gender until after Riala comes in and misgenders Knights. Unless there's a text box I didn't read that I should have.
It's actually a good point, because I know at some point Riala refers to Knights as a good boy, and then that's where it sort of spirals from.
And that's the only time we ever get a gender out of Knights, or that's the first time, rather, we get a gender out of Knights in Will's story. And then he immediately...
And because of Riala's disposition, that would, like, in context, almost without a doubt, be a definite intentional misgendering. But of course, Will doesn't see that. He just sees an enemy being
I just see it
mean.
as him treating him like a dog, you know, like or treating Knights as a dog in general, like you know, that's a good boy. It's belittling, you know. It's the kind of thing Eggman would say to any one of the cast. For example, Team Rose in Sonic Heroes. Don't get too excited, boys. There's one boy, and he's 20, amongst 2 little girls. God, that game has some weird issues. Point is, it comes across as belittling more than anything else to me, but the point is that he said boy, probably not intending to identify Knights as a boy, as an accurate representation of Knights, and Will got the wrong idea, because Will is sitting there like, I can't tell what this thing is. Is Knights male or female? I can't tell! And I can understand why that would be kind of stressful to him, so when he finally hears something that aligns Knights in his head, good, okay, now I know, Knights is a guy, because he's a good boy. You know, I don't know. I find that fascinating, though, because once you brought that up in the LP, I had to go back through the rest of it just to make sure. Knights is never identified as one gender or the other before Riala says that to Will, or in front of Will. So that helps at least solidify Knights as being female in Will's story. So I know I at least used the right pronouns while recording my video that's going up today. Anyway.
And also there's the whole thing of Knights having that invisible flute thing, but we only ever see them playing it in Will's story. Because, of course, to Helen, being a musician isn't all that exotic because that's her life. But to Will, it's like, whoa, you could play an instrument. Wow, I can't do that. That's rare and cool. And Helen's like, oh, same.
And doesn't she do it again in his story? At some point, like late in the story, she's like sitting somewhere playing flute. Right, when Riala shows up in Delight City. Delight City. That one, the neon place. Okay, wow, we covered that a lot faster than I thought we would. We've been recording for an hour.
There was some other facet to the gender discussion as well that I'd thought of and once again has left my brain space, so...
Oh, I can give you as much time as you want. Let me just make sure I covered all this stuff. Oh, I literally just wrote down Nightmares and identity politics. We already recovered that. Oh! There is an interesting thing to be said, and I'll just waste time with this while you're trying to gather your thoughts, but the idea of, you know, the actual Nightopias reflecting the visitor, perhaps revealing what's missing from their heart, or whatever, is that what Knights is as well? A reflection of the visitor to complement their being, in a sense? And that's why they can dualize with Knights and fly around their dreams, because then it's an entire reflection of who they are. And reflection, therefore, across the board, right becomes left, left becomes right. Clearly, Knights contrast their political views. Oh!
That's giving me just mental images now. Like, just, I don't want to make this political, but I can just imagine sort of Helen being like, you know, maybe we should be equal to people from everywhere. And Knight's just like, no, Helen, we should build the wall. Just
Come
Helen just...
on, Helen, let's build the wall. Hey, it's Octawall.
just Helen sort of slowly lowering her violin like, Knights, what the fuck?
Octawall. This is This is something I'm going to be carrying with me for a while.
And my idea came back, and then it went again, but that does raise
God
a question.
damn it,
Why can't Riala use personas? Can you just imagine Rocket Riala?
I'm just sad we haven't had a Dragon Wisp. I should have added the rocket sound effect. That's right. Shit. Anyway, I'll do it for the video. That's okay. I got time. I got 2 days to edit that. Anyway. Oh, there was something else you brought up to me when I first brought this up to you, and now I'm blanking on it completely. God damn it. It has to do with that. It's somewhere in our Discord logs. I'm not gonna bother looking it up, but Nights as a Reflection. I completely forgot about this, so quick subject change. Helen Cartwright and William Taylor, their last names are both occupations. Like, I find that a little weird. Cartwright being a dude who designs carts, and Taylor being a seamstress, but not necessarily female. However, Taylor is generally less masculine than carters, if I may be so bold as to say. I wonder if that reflects anything, if that's deterministic at all about their characters, because names mean shit and stuff, yo.
Does that apply to the first game as well, though?
I don't know what their last
Elliot
names were.
Edwards and Clarice Sinclair. Well, Sinclair is a kind of computer, I think.
Clarice Sinclair? Are you kidding me? That's...
Oh, right, yeah, it's kind of obvious now that you say it out loud.
That's really dumb. Sinclairice. Okay. Elliot... What was it? Edgewood?
Edwards.
Edwards.
Plural.
Elliot Edwards. Yeah, okay, so they're both supposed to be semi-alliteration. I wonder, though. Name origins, whatever. Add in a text note about that if it means anything. I'm not going to bother wasting time on that.
Well, I suppose you could interpret from it, in the case of Elliot's name, the repetition goes in the same direction, but with Clarice's, it's a sort of a mirror reflection, so it goes left to right and then right to left. Ooh. So Clarice Sinclair, but Elliot Edwards. Does that make sense at all?
Significance?
You decide!
I'm not going to bother deciding on that. You look into it on your own, visitor, viewer, whatever the word is for it.
Woohoo!
I feel like I had something deep and emotional to say about Octopaw, and I'm completely blanking on it now. How could Octopaw be relevant? Shoot. Well, I've exhausted literally everything that's coming to my mind, and I was too stupid to write down the last thing, apparently. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
There was something else to do with knights and gender and something else, and it's going to win my goat.
Dude, my goat has been procured long before now, and it is currently bang.
Do you want to
over the
explain
hill.
that one, because that was during a stream, so if you want to explain that, then go right ahead.
Explain what?
Win a goat.
Oh, no, it's just... See, that's my problem, is I just hear it as get my goat, but better. Earned, even. I don't remember saying win my goat. Yeah, that was you. You explain it.
It's from the soundtrack, and it's supposed to be win a goal, because it's from Will's ending.
That's the one!
But it came out as win a goat.
Yeah, that soundtrack thing is stupid. I didn't realize that custard really, like, cowardly custard is an actual phrase.
That's an expression.
Over there. Yeah, because custard is woobly, and it never even occurred to me.
I think it's more just for the alliteration, but hey, that too. Anyway, also custard is a non-Newtonian fluid. It, by definition, does not wooble.
Fluid? Octopaw is gender fluid! Sorry, yes?
But I remembered what I was going to say. Cultural androgyny. That was it. The idea that, like, we look at the game and we hear the voice acting and think, what the fuck is this meant to be? What is this weird-ass accent shit?
That's right! Thank you!
But it's a cultural amalgamation of stuff. Like, Bellbridge is supposed to be loosely based on London as far as the clock tower goes, but then the rest of it is just a global city. And it could be any clock tower, it's just inspired by the Elizabeth Clock Tower, formerly the Victoria Clock Tower, and occasionally misreferred to as Big Ben. So even the bell is misgendered. But, But anyway, this idea of the game taking place in this melted... I think it has more significance to American audiences because it's culturally androgynous, but it's decidedly foreign to all of them. So the whole game takes place somewhere decidedly other than America, but I'm not entirely sure that's the intention, bearing in mind that Elliot plays basketball and Will plays football as opposed to any distinctly American sports, whereas soccer is known the world over. And you know, in the case of Helen and Clarice, what they do is, again, internationally recognised as sort of it transcends cultural boundaries. And so, especially to English-speaking territories, this idea of the accent being this weird amalgamation of English with a tiny bit of American, but a lot of, like, Australia and New Zealand, but it's not enough to thoroughly commit to one or the other. It's this idea of it being this other place, all one word, other place, it's familiar, but it's also very not familiar.
Elliot, no, not Elliot. Will sounds like a British person trying to do an American accent and doing a pretty darn good job. Helen sounds like someone from New Zealand trying to sound British and doing, I think, a good job. And Knight sounds like somebody who was told, combine every accent under the sun for English together into one. And I really like that because then there's always that slight sense of otherness that no one's going to be 100% comfortable with Knight's accent, therefore her voice being this other thing that's, like, you know, slightly apart from that. But at the same time, like, hey, look at this, Knights, and I had somewhere I was going with this. Finish my thought for me.
Well, I was going to say, one thing that would sort of help us draw a conclusion with this is, what is the audio like in other languages? I mean, most likely there's probably only English and Japanese, because that's what Sega usually does. Like, they have the big 5 European languages for subtitles, and then just English and Japanese for the voiceover.
Until recently.
And I did look into it, and I couldn't find any, like, actual Japanese language footage, because, like, I saw some cutscenes with Japanese subtitles but English voiceover, so I don't even know if a Japanese voiceover exists. You would have thought that it does, but
they didn't do it for Bayonetta either. Some Japanese directors have a really strong affinity for British accents.
Well, fair enough.
I mean, everyone knows British accents are hot, so I'm glad that even Japan knows that British English accents are hot. So...
No.
So, no, that was definitely a French mew. Neil, I say. Zvari. Anyway, yeah, no, there's definitely something to be said if that's the case. And
even if it's not the case in the Japanese audio, it could still be a deliberate conscious direction for the English voicing, because that's easier to do with English because there's spread around the world of distinct English accents, because, you know, the Antipodean accents are nothing like the European accents, which are nothing like the American accents, so there's this spread, and it's easier to mix them up and, well, not mix up, but, like, to mix them together and create something that's different, whereas the only countries that speak Japanese are Japan and Palau, so...
You mean there is a second country that actually speaks Japanese? I had no idea.
It's a secondary language, but, yeah. So the best they could do is, like, hey, I'm speaking Japanese, here are a couple of words in Kansai, which I think is just, like, Yorkshire Japanese. So, if for instance they did Chinese audio, if they were to, like, dip back and forth between Mandarin and Cantonese, for example, that might... But then again, it might just be like, oh, well, clearly whoever wrote this doesn't speak Chinese. So, I don't know. It's something that's easiest done with English and maybe French.
Yeah, French would be a nightmare to try to bring them all together, but that'd be kind of interesting. It's not intentional, I swear. So, just to quickly sum that up, because I don't think we outright stated it, Knights, as a voice actress, the lady who is brought in to play Knights, who has done other work for Sega, and I think that's it. I remember looking up her IMDb, and all she's responsible for is a bunch of Sega. She was in Sonic Shuffle, I think. Nope, I'm not gonna misinformation, everyone. We're gonna look it up, and we're gonna cut. Hang on. Skies of Arcadia, that's the one I was thinking of. Not Sonic Shuffle. I get the two mixed up a lot. I don't know why.
Easily done?
I think. So, here's an actress who was asked, I think, to play a genderly androgynous character with an androgynous accent from various sources. So I find that kind of interesting that it's all forms of androgyny, welcoming anyone to identify with Knights however they see fit, but likely always slightly off. She's a little more tomboy than most girls, and yet he's also more feminine than most guys, and they're also from wherever you're not from when it comes to accents. So I find that kind of interesting.
The language is the same, but the accent is different, so there is still some level of familiarity to take refuge in.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm starting to think that was the conscious point, especially given that Owl's decidedly British, and the kids are decidedly kids. I have nothing else to say on the kids. They're voice acting, just replace them. I'd honestly be happy if everyone else was kept the same because Rial is really hot.
No comment.
I think that's it.
But I do think, bearing in mind everything we've said in this video, and in the Let's Play, and everything, if there were to be a Knights Mania, for want of a better title, a Knights 3 made specifically by fans of the first two games, and if Sega just puts it in their hands rather than trying to create something out of nothing, it could potentially be just the best Knights game, because it would harmonise what was done right in the two games, because as we pointed out as well, the first game was decidedly score attack, and Journey of Dreams is decidedly a bit different from that, so the gameplay is slightly different. So I'd imagine that if you had that creativity mixed with this solid idea of, okay, we're going for this cultural and gender androgyny, or if you want a different term for that, this idea of nebulousness in terms of all forms of identity as a talking point, then you can go into it with that mentality by people who know exactly what they're talking about, and create a game that best represents everything that the Knights franchise has always been supposed to be about. And I am so down for doing that!
I mean, I just like the idea of a third game marrying the concepts of the first and second that worked. I'm hoping that's what they're doing with Bayonetta, another series that doesn't have Japanese voice. Or originally didn't, now does. That's dumb. Anyway, here's my bias showing. Yeah, no, that's the thing though. I would love a Knights 3. I think everyone would.
I feel though, like, something's nagging at the back of my head saying, if they were to make a Knights 3, the final level would just have the Eiffel Tower in it. But it's dressed up like, ooh, is it the Eiffel Tower? Is it the Tokyo Tower? Is it something in Las Vegas? We don't know. It's wherever you're not from.
Can you imagine?
And it's just Paris.
Decidedly Paris, but the Eiffel Tower has, like, the needle thing from the top of the Empire State Building, and, like, maybe a bell in it. I don't know. Like, just...
that sounds more like it would be a kingdom from Lunatia, but I'd still be down for it.
Sydney Opera House wings coming out of the legs. Yeah, yeah! Oh, I like that idea. Full androgyny across anywhere that even understands English.
There's just a pyramid at the bottom, and just on the opposite side of the city there's the Brandenburg Gate, or is it the Arc de Triomphe? We don't know. And the pyramid, is it Giza? Is it the Louvre? It's probably Paris. That's just the name of the level, probably Paris.
Twin Seeds, Bellbridge.
Probably Paris.
The new fragrance by Dior.
Do you want a body wash that'll really bring out your inner androgyny? Probably Paris is your solution. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot.
Woo! Anyway, we've been going for an hour and a quarter.
Yeah, now I think we covered everything I came into this wanting to talk about, so I probably shouldn't even bring up the fact that the idia represent the 5 stages of grief, because we know how long you'll go on about that. Go ahead. I love it when you do this.
It takes courage to deny it, and you're being pure and innocent, and from that innocence you're getting angry because why should it happen to you? It's so pure and so sweet, and there must be a better explanation. And then that leads into the intelligence of trying to barter with the universe and saying, no, kill this guy instead, and then make it be not dead. And then you're growing up to be sad, and then there's hope so that everything's gonna be okay, and there's acceptance.
Alright, that's it, we're done, bye! I have nothing more to add.
I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons, and this is my legacy. Good night, everyone.
I think I'm still HeatherOnStevia. I don't even know. Bye. Au revoir. Enjoy your trip.